The budget process for the operations portion of it, that $168 currently, in the past, what we have done is we have spun off a budgeted head count that the model comes up with based upon the revenue that we expect to generate, and we wheeled off of that for our head count. This time, we're starting with how many people actually work here now. For example, one of the areas that although it's going down in frequency and certainly going down in volume, the change from being staffed at the gatehouse to having automated fashion was one of the things that we never would have done if we could have found people that wanted to do that job in Aurora, Colorado, at the price that we could pay them and perform it in a fashion that met our standards. If we could have had those 3 heads that were budgeted out there, we wouldn't be in the situation that we were in. And part of my day, for example, has been following up on the concerns about ambulances out there with their lights flashing and not being able to get the gate. So let me tell you the answer to that one, which really doesn't have anything to do per se with the budget. All Aurora all Aurora police and fire have a special code to get in that gate. All the fire trucks have a transponder. The ambulance service for Aurora is outsourced to a company called Falk. Falk also has transponders in their primary vehicles that service here. But they also have that emergency code. So, the fact that they couldn't get in there is still a mystery to us, but we take that very seriously. Back to the budget, that is an area where we counted actual heads, since we don't have those 3 heads that were in the budget going forward. Once we had that, we did an updated forecast for the remainder of 2017. Here's what we did. We took how much money had we made January through September, January through August. Well, it was September, wasn't it? August. January through August, actual. Then we went to historical trends, what we had in the past run from September through December, used that trend, added those 2 together to get our forecast at the end for 2017, which allowed us to develop the revenue plans for golf and food and beverage. From there, we calculated the head counts by department required to achieve the revenue plan. So actual, as opposed to letting the computer run the model and come up with a head count. And then finally, the budgeted payroll and operating costs based upon the planned and expected cost increases. So, Bob, I'm going to ask you to speak to the operations budget.
So we categorize our revenues in 3 ways. Total golf revenues, and that is all forms of revenues from greens fees, cart fees, cart trail fees, annual passes, golf shop merchandise, driving range, all of that is baked into that one number. Next year it's budgeted at $1,653,575. To the right you can see the latest forecast for this year, just short of $1.6 million. And you can see how that compares to the budget for this year and how that compares to the actual result in 2016. Next line is the food and beverage. We're budgeting $1,544,000. Categories there are dining room, catering golf, catering non-golf, room rental, on-course, very small piece, but on-course food and beverage sales. But about $1 million of that is the Eagle's Nest, and another $500,000 is catering non-golf, weddings, high school athletic banquets, many of the events that are held in this very room. You can see the forecast, how that compares to the forecast for this year of just under $1,477,000, and you can see the shortfall against the budgeted amount for this year of $1,523,000. 2016, the actual result, $1,530,000. The shortfall against of the forecast against budget is primarily, it's equally split between dining room and catered non-golf. We just have not been able to get the number of catered events that we had budgeted for this year. And so that season really peaks in the summer, and as we get into the fall, there's no recovering from that, and that's reflected in the forecast. Finally, HOA, 80% of that is that $168 we currently pay. Currently paid in 2017, budgeted in 2017, and an actual in 2016. Quite a decrease there. $3,197,000 versus $3,360,000, budgeted $3,415,000. Included in the budgeted amount, the biggest component other than the dues are the services, landscape and snow for individual homeowners that are performed by OB staff who otherwise also take care of all the grounds here. And that compares to last year's $3,373,000. So we're budgeting a shortfall in revenue against forecast, $6,394,000. Forecast $6,437,000. Budget $6.5 million. Actual last year $6.5 million. Food and beverage and golf shop merchandise, those each case, in the case of food and beverage, those are the consumables that are sold. And in the case of the golf shop, that's strictly the merchandise that is sold. And there you can see the amounts as they compare against budgeted forecast, current year budget, and last year. Total payroll and burden. Obviously, we rolled that up by department at a very fine level. However, for this purpose here, we show it as Heritage Eagle Bend. Heritage Eagle Bend is more than the sum of a golf course and a food and beverage operation and an HOA operation. Altogether, it's greater than the sum of its parts, and this is how I prefer to show it. But of course, it's all budgeted down to a very fine level for operating purposes. And then finally, all expenses other than payroll and burden, $2,767,000, forecast $2,626,000, favorable to budget $2,664,000, and then last year's $2,638,000. So in total, for the first time ever, I believe, we are budgeting a loss of just short of $208,000. This year we expect to finish on the trend run at $176,000 excess of revenues over expenses, compared to a budgeted excess of $51,000, more or less break even, and then last year's actual result of $278,000. A couple overall comments I'd like to share with some folks, because over the last month or so, lots of talk about, my God, we lose money in food and beverage, we lose money in golf. This must be due to an awful job of being done by OB Sports. And I apologize for reading this, but I want to get it absolutely correct. And I want to say it in such a way that hopefully it registers, because later on we're going to have a Q&A, and we'll come back to these same themes. But try to keep this in mind. Heritage Eagle Bend is operated first and foremost for the residents of Heritage Eagle Bend, even though the golf course and the food and beverage operations are open to the public. Second, giving priority to the residents while still marketing and selling to the public are constraints on OB Sports. Constraints we put on OB Sports in terms of maximizing profitability and the golf and food and beverage operations. Those are for-profit operations, but we do not charge them with maximizing the profit. They have a tricky balancing act they have to do, because first and foremost, that golf course and this food and beverage operation are for the residents. They are available to the public, but they are first and foremost designed for the residents, and we put constraints on OB as to what they can do to otherwise maximize the profit. And these constraints are imposed on OB Sports by the board as an extension of the wishes of the HEB community. You have told us we want a reasonably priced food service. We want to be able to set 4 mornings a week aside for resident play in the various leagues and such. Obviously, there is a cost to doing that. There is an opportunity cost and a real cost in terms of bottom line. And these constraints necessarily result in low operating profit or losses for the 2 revenue-producing areas of Heritage Eagle Bend. Finally, the operating results are not a reflection of OB's inability to profitably manage golf and food and beverage operation, but reflect the constraints placed upon them by agreement and by the community. OB operates over 50 resorts and country clubs across the U.S. They are experts in golf operations and food and beverage operations, believe me. They have more business than they can handle. We are the only one that is tied in with an HOA, and we are a complicated HOA. We are an HOA with a golf course and a full-blown food and beverage operation. That makes it complex, but we've got the right people managing it. Couple more. Let's take a look at let's break apart that bottom line. 207,971 loss. The way that breaks down is golf is budgeted to make $201,000. Food and beverage is budgeted to lose $129,000. And HOA, and those expenses included in that line for clubhouse and general and administrative, is budgeted to lose $280,000. Net effect, a loss of $208,000. In that forecast, bottom line, 176,439. Golf is budgeted to return an excess of revenues over expenses, i.e. net income, $263,000. Food and beverage is now forecasted to lose $123,000, and the HOA makes $36,000 for a net of $176,439. The budget for this year: golf, profit, $115,740. Food, loss, $70,500. HOA, break even, $5,500. Finally, 2016, golf made $256,000. Food and beverage lost $25,000. HOA made $47,000. Golf has made money every year that OB has managed Heritage Eagle Bend. So people say, well, what about that food and beverage operation? It has lost money every year since the handoff from Lennar. We've lost money every year. And I've just read the results for 16, the budget for 17, the forecast for 18, and the budget for 18. The goal has always been to generate enough margin from third-party catering, golf and non-golf, to offset the adverse effect of discounted food, beverage, and other amenities to residents by policy and design. The closest that goal came to being achieved was 2016, when a loss of $25,000 was incurred on total F&B revenues of $1,530,000. F&B revenues have increased from $1,154,000 in 2014 to over $1.5 million, a 33% increase, and we still cannot get that to a positive bottom line. The $50,000 decline in 2017 in dining room and catering revenues from 16, combined with increasing costs, result in the forecasted loss of $123,000. In 2018, F&B revenues are budgeted to nearly return to 2016 levels. The pricing is unchanged, even as costs are expected to increase overall by 5%. On an annual basis, F&B revenues are impacted by a restriction on the number of rounds for group tournaments. 34,500 rounds of golf are budgeted for next year. Of that number, only 2,500 are reserved for group tournaments for non-residents. OB could easily sell 7,500 rounds, but as a result of that, resident play would be greatly affected. As a result of only 2,500 rounds, there is a resulting adverse effect on food, beverage, and catering revenue, because in most cases, these tournaments are followed by a dinner or some type of an award ceremony. It also has an impact on golf shop revenue. The prime of your life to HEB residents. How many take advantage of that at least every year or so? The annual cost of that, and that is at no cost, that's table service, $35,000. Zero revenue. Yes, there are some beverage sales we get from that, but the cost of that benefit, which the residents love and would dearly miss, $35,000. No room rentals are charged to clubs and districts despite the cost to set up and take down, and also the potential loss of revenue from the room being occupied rather than a rental paying third party. The discounted food and beverage costs for resident events, for example, district parties and resident food buffets. Discounted food, beverage, and room rentals to residents for private catered events, for example, weddings, parties, celebrations, and memorial services. And then finally, we have our increased cost to recruit and retain kitchen, bar, and wait staff in a tight labor market with little room to pass on the cost increases. That, my friends, is why we have a loss in food and beverage. Residents first, public second. It is not due to mismanagement by OB or an inability for them to figure out how to run a food and beverage operation at Heritage Eagle Bend. They could turn this into a money-making enterprise, and you would not like what they would have to do as a resident